Today, I will share how to use your phone's camera to take better videos and photos in natural light. First of all, we have to confirm 4 issues of matters. Firstly, of course, not to say you must have a phone. That's a joke. Actually, it's the issue of how much can you accept the distortion of your phone's camera. Some mobiles get multiple lenses with different focal length, but there are still mobiles which get only one lens. There may be a zoom function from that camera. However, that may not be an actual optical zoom and instead just magnify or minify from the original image. So, no difference to you crop and enlarge during post-production. So, for certain mobiles, when you want to film a portrait, you may have to keep the camera fairly close to the subject. In such a case, you have to find out first how close and how the distortion of the image that you can accept. For example, you only feel comfortable when you have to place the camera quite far away, but then it's no longer a close-up portrait. So you have to crop it. That's also why the resolution of those mobile cameras is so high nowadays. It gives you room for enlarging and cropping. And that's the first thing you have to figure out. Otherwise, the image may be distorted once the camera is too close to your subject, which is quite ugly, and so find out how the range of the distortion that you can tolerate first. Secondly, many mobile phone cameras can now simulate a fairly good shadow depth of field effect. If you get this function, I highly recommend you use it for portrait, since the shadow depth of field can help your subject to stand out. And I would say that the effect is pretty good, very close to what a real camera with a wide aperture achieves. So just use it for better portrait photos. Thirdly, I found that many people unconsciously shoot vertically. I don't tend to talk much regarding this issue at this moment, but you may consider shooting horizontally. See what's the difference. Indeed, what I want to say is many people just use one hand to hold the camera. The other hand is used for pressing the virtual button of the screen. For holding the camera with just one hand, there may be vibration when you press the virtual shutter. And because there may be a delay after pressing the shutter, and this delay may end up affecting the clarity of the photo. Just a bit of latency, but you think the image is captured when you press the shutter, and then the image will be blurred out. And you can't find out until you get home and check it on the big screen. You can improve it by using 2 hands to hold and grab your mobile, the same as you hold a real camera. Or you will say that it's quite difficult to press the virtual button, but you may try. The volume button may also act as a shutter on many mobiles. It will be then much easier and just very similar to using a real camera. The fourth point is, as the topic says, shoot with natural light with your mobile's camera. But you have to confirm the above 3 points first, and then we can go ahead. Regarding shooting with light, first of all, we have to ask ourselves that, are we aware of and take light into account when shooting? So philosophical? No, I've observed that many people will mainly focus on the subject and the environment they shoot, but just ignore the light. Or they take it for granted that there's always light in the world. Actually, not so. You have to be conscious of light if you want to take good photos. Where is your subject standing? He or she is standing in a light or dark area. Frankly, if your idea is to place your subject in a dark place, it's fine. But if that's not your intention and not considered, that's a problem. If your subject is standing in an ugly place without good lighting illumination, the photo will also be very ugly. We have to care with light first so we can continue to how to manipulate light. And how to manipulate light? Firstly, we are talking about the direction of light source. Basically, there are mainly 4 directions, and they are front light, side light, top light, and back light. When we talk about natural light, of course, the main light source would be the sun. When it's good weather, the sunlight will be very bright and a bit harsh. On the other hand, the lighting direction seems to disappear on cloudy days, and the light will be a little softer. So, relatively speaking, the summer sun will be a bit harsh. That's the main difference between the sun at different times or different weathers. And of course, there are different treatments under the above 4 different lighting directions. Let us talk about the front light first. I remember when I was very young, my mother always took pictures with me. Used those twin-lens reflector box type cameras and 124 mag films. Sure, my mother was not an expert, but she still got certain principles. One of those is that the subject has to try the best to face the sun for better photos. Why? This is because if the sun or the light source is behind you, the internal light meter of your camera, of course, didn't note that you are off the sun and won't compensate automatically. The metering then may be wrong, and since the meter will just read your bright background as a reference, and then it will give you a very small aperture reading. Photos are of course gone out to be silhouettes. Or in reverse, the meter wrongly read that it's very dark and then give you a very large aperture. And then the photo will be overexposed. So in order to avoid such results, the best way is shooting with direct front light. I had to face the sun directly, and even the sun is very bright and I can't fully open my eyes. I still have to keep my eyes open, even with tears. I still have to face it and smile. I won't say that the front light is absolutely not an ideal direction, since there are many ways to achieve a good photo. But there's at least one defect. I try to point out the defect first. If you are shooting with front light, anything in the image gets the same amount of lighting as the subject. Everything. We say that the whole world is lit. To make matters worse, the background is much brighter than you. And there are certain ways of re-perceiving the world. Any subject that will catch your eyes at least get 2 important factors. One of that is we will try to look at those bright areas first. Of course, it has to be clear and sharp. So the bright and sharp objects will catch our attention first. But if all things are in the same brightness, firstly, your subject won't stand out enough, and then that won't be an eye-catching subject. Thus, in ordinary speaking, the direct front light is not easy to give you an ideal and beautiful picture. So, if you really have to shoot with front light, how can we solve it? I will suggest that try to find a darker background. It will at least give you a lateral separation and help your subject stand out. This would be the best and simplest way to deal with front light when filming. The second is side light. Side light is traditionally the sweet spot for key lights in 3-point lighting. It's located at about 45 degrees from the axis of the subject to the camera. It's the light that gives your subjects the 3-dimensional feeling. Of course, you may go further even to 90 degrees, the absolute side light. Compared to the front light, the side light will give your subject more dimensionality. And you may find that the front light will flatten the spherical feeling of the human head. Side light will enhance the 2D feeling to a better 3D feel. The absolute side light will give you a very contrasting look, which is very dramatic. And when dealing with the sunlight, the side light from a harsh sun may result in a very harsh and deep shadow, which is not so beautiful. To soften and lighten up the shadow, one of the ways is using a reflector. But since I want to make it in a much simpler way, instead of using the reflector, you may use the torch from your phone. Switch on the torchlight to light up the shadow directly. Of course, it will be a lot better if you can adjust the power of the torchlight, so you can easily get a balance of the contrast. Or if there is no any adjustment, you may try to put on a tissue, put in front of the torchlight as a diffuser. Then you can also balance the contrast and achieve a much more beautiful effect. The third one is the top light or overhead light. Regarding the sun, of course, it means that the sun is directly at your top. And ordinarily speaking, we will try to avoid using top light to shoot, no matter it's filmmaking or photo shooting. Firstly, if it's summer noon, you are already having a hard time standing outdoor in the sun, let alone filming. On the other hand, the top light will create an unpleasant effect that our eye socket will be wholly covered by shadow. Furthermore, another side effect may occur if you are in a certain big open area under top light. The ground is highly illuminated by the sun, and so the ground also bounces back big amount of light to the subject. That's so-called the low light, which is very unnatural, weird, and of course quite ugly. Such low lights always being applied in horror movies. And of course, it will hardly for us to get beautiful portraits in this moment. And how can we solve this? Firstly, try your best to avoid or eliminate the bounce low light from the ground. Secondly, you may ask your subject to slightly raise their head and place your camera a bit higher from a higher angle to shoot. Now you can see that many girls love selfies like this. There is also another bonus when selfie like this under top sunlight. That is, there will be a highlight spot in your eyeballs. So, in addition to helping you achieve a V-shaped face, it also highlights your eyes and makes you more charming. On the other hand, we will deliberately use the top light for some special occasions. For example, shooting in wood. The trees will block the light from outside. To get around this, we will try to film inside wood with top light in the noontime, since the overhead lights can pass through the trees and the leaves. Add up with smoke if available. It will give you very beautiful layers. With the same principle, if you want to achieve certain effects of some shadow patterns, you may shoot under overhead light. For example, this roof has a certain pattern design which can create hard shadow with top light. It will give your subject some interesting shadow effects. The fourth is backlight. Backlight is very useful in atmospheric portrait. The only concern is whether the light source will show up in the photo. If the light source is seen, it will give us some interesting flares. Or in reverse speaking, even if there aren't any flares, we can create it by ourselves. With your mobile torchlight, turn it on and directly hit on the lens of your camera. Try to find the best hitting angle to create the flares. And again, with the same principle, backlight is very useful for certain dramatized feeling. For example, if you want to highlight the smoke effect, not limited to the cigarette, or you want to show a bowl of hot noodles with very warm feeling, backlight will also enhance the feel. The above suggestions are mainly done with the automatic mode of your mobile. That means mainly with auto exposure. And regarding auto exposure, there is a tool that can be taken into consideration for a different effect. And that's the different metering mode in your camera. Generally speaking, there are three metering modes. They are spot, center area, and overall average. Sometimes it will change your final effect with different metering. However, although I insist try my best to shoot in a simpler way, better photos are easier to achieve in professional mode, since it will give you more control of your camera. My mobile here also offers me a professional mode, or you may download a pro app if your phone didn't offer you. Most of them are free of charge. Okay, does it mean with the pro mode is no longer simple? Don't worry, even with more control, it can still be very simple. I'm not asking you to learn very complicated theory before using the pro app. No, it only offers you more choice and control. Still very simple. The professional function mainly offers you more control within 5 aspects. The first one is the white balance. The second one is the shutter. And then the ISO, EV, exposure value, and finally the burst shooting. And since burst shooting doesn't involve the usage of natural light, so I will skip talking about this today, and I will just focus on the first 4 items. White balance could be very complicated. Put it simply, it affects the main color bias of your image. For example, warmer or cooler tone, blue or amber bias. Most of the time, your photo will have a very good white balance color temperature in auto mode, quite close to what we are seeing, but sometimes not. For example, your camera may not really be able to render what a sunset or magic hour looks like. It only gives you a very white sunset in auto mode. Or did you have such an impression that when you film in a very amber or golden tone hotel lobby or ballroom, your photos turn out to be very white balanced? In dealing with such conditions, you may try to change the color temperature. There are always 5 to 6 icons for choosing: fluorescent, candle, sunshine, overcast, for example. And simply choose those icons to change the color. Or you may choose directly with a different value. I showed you here another photo. Actually, it was taken during magic hour, but it appeared very white balanced with auto mode, which won't give you the sunset feeling. And you may then decrease the color temperature value to around 3000 something. It will then give back you the sunset feel, same as those golden look indoor lobby or ballroom. Auto mode will give you a white look. You can adjust the color temperature to restore the golden look. The second tool is the shutter. Yes, the shutter is the main tool to freeze the moment we want to capture. Your camera will offer you the best or suitable shutter in most cases, but of course, sometimes we will use other shutter speeds to achieve certain effects. For example, when shooting water flow, auto shutter will give you an image like this. The water droplets are very clear, which is not the same in reality. Yes, such an effect may not be bad, but you may have another idea. If you want to have silk smooth light effect, you have to slow down the shutter speed. Slow shutter speed also gives you another kind of effect. For example, you can still highlight your subject in a very crowded area by using slow shutter speed, since all the other moving stuff will be blurred out. Or filming in nighttime, slow shutter will give you certain light trail, which will enhance the photo in a much dynamic way. So, the slow shutter not only can give us more light input, but also allow us to create the above effect when needed. Regarding the ISO, most of the time it's used with the shutter to balance a perfect exposure. For example, when you are using slow shutter, you will decrease the ISO value. In short, a higher ISO will give you a higher starting point for a brighter image, while lower ISOs would in principle do the opposite. The final tool is the EV, exposure value. And among all, I think that the EV is the most important. Phone cameras are not equipped with apertures due to the lack of lenses. So, how to adjust the exposure? The EV is the best direct and simple tool. Higher EVs give you more exposure or vice versa with the lower EV. By the way, not all the time you have to adjust the EV when shooting. So, when will be the best moment should we use it? For example, when you shoot in the magic hour, there is the sunset as well as those neon lights just turning on. If you shoot with auto mode, the meter may not recognize those neon lights. And while it's still quite dark during sunset moment, your camera will give you a brighter reading and exposure. In such cases, you may use the Pro mode. Try to lower the EV, and once the EV is decreased, the mood reappeared. Now on the other hand, you can also try to change the white balance at the same time. Not a must be a warm tone, or you may try a bluish color. For example, for this photo, I choose a blue tone, and then the color contrast is a bit bigger. It can give us another kind of feeling. Finally, let me have a brief conclusion. And after all, do you think it's really simple? If not, I suggest you watch it again. Actually, it's really not complex to learn. And lastly, what I want to emphasize is that if you can really understand such techniques, it will give you more fun in filming. And on the other hand, it's also a very basic understanding of light. So, if you want to progress in a simpler way, you have to know and learn this beforehand.